A man divorcing his black wife with his mistress smiling, until the judge turned the tables. The courtroom feels like a mausoleum, cold, silent, and built for endings. Patricia Brown Anderson sits at the plaintiff's table in a white-collared shirt so crisp it could cut glass, her hands folded with the precision of someone who's learned to weaponize composure. The air conditioning hums too loudly. Someone coughs in the gallery. Behind the bench, scales of justice gleam on the wall like a promise that's been broken too many times to still feel reassuring. Across the narrow aisle, Daniel Anderson, her husband of 14 years, reclines in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who believes he's already won. His silver pen hovers over divorce papers he hasn't bothered to read carefully, because why would he? This is supposed to be a formality. A rubber stamp on what he's privately called the cleanup phase of my life. Beside him, Hannah Brooks crosses her legs slowly, deliberately. The red dress she's chosen slices through the courtroom's neutral palette like a wound that refuses to heal. She catches Patricia's eye and smiles, not with warmth, but with the cold triumph of someone watching an execution they orchestrated. Her presence here isn't accidental. It's territorial. A victory flag planted in enemy soil before the battle is officially over. This is the moment Daniel has been engineering for 18 months, the legal dissolution of what he's rewritten as the biggest mistake of my career. What he doesn't know, what neither he nor the woman in red could possibly suspect, is that Patricia stopped being a victim the moment she discovered the $340,000 wire transfer to HB Consulting Solutions. The woman in the white shirt isn't defeated. She's dangerous. And in approximately 7 minutes, when Daniel signs his name with that silver pen, he won't be ending a marriage. He'll be signing a confession. The 14-year marriage Daniel is about to dissolve was built on Patricia's brilliance, her reputation as the youngest senior analyst at Morrison & Hecht, her professional network that secured APV's first major clients, the $180,000 from her family inheritance that transformed his chaos into a $8.7 million business. She was the architect, the engineer, the foundation. He was the face that smiled for cameras and took credit for blueprints he couldn't read. Now he sits ready to erase her from the narrative entirely, to rewrite history with Hannah as his co-author and Patricia as a footnote about support from the home front. The stakes couldn't be higher. Patricia faces not just heartbreak, but systematic financial destruction, her home refinanced without her knowledge, her name forged on quitclaim deeds, her retirement accounts looted, her professional reputation poisoned by whispers that she's unstable and bitter. Beyond the money, beyond even the betrayal, Daniel is attempting something more insidious, to render Patricia invisible in the very life she built. To prove that a black woman's contributions can be stolen, repackaged, and credited to the white man who benefited from them, while she disappears into the margins of her own story. But what Daniel and Hannah don't realize, what they couldn't possibly understand because they've spent 18 months mistaking strategic silence for surrender, is that the woman they've been systematically degrading has been 3 moves ahead all along. Every condescending explanation Daniel offered, Patricia documented. Every racist microaggression Hannah delivered with a smile, Patricia recorded. Every fraudulent transfer, every forged signature, every shell company created to loot marital assets, Patricia tracked it all with the meticulous precision of someone who built financial models for a living. The courtroom they've entered so confidently, treating this hearing like a mere formality on their path to freedom, is about to become the stage for their complete and irrevocable undoing. Patricia sits perfectly still, her face unreadable, her posture impeccable. She looks like someone who's accepted defeat. She looks like someone who's been broken. She looks exactly the way she wants them to see her. Because in 7 minutes, Daniel Anderson will learn what happens when you underestimate the woman who taught you everything you know about building empires, and then mistake her silence for ignorance. The pen touches paper. And the execution begins. Patricia Brown Anderson wasn't supposed to be invisible. At 24, she'd been the youngest senior analyst at Morrison & Hecht, a corporate finance powerhouse where partners whispered her name with the kind of reverence usually reserved for market legends. She had scholarships named after her at Howard University. Mentors who called her the best talent they'd trained in a decade. A career trajectory that should have led to a managing director position before she turned 35. Then came the Real Estate Investment Conference in Chicago. Spring 2011. Daniel Anderson had been charming in the way ambitious men often are, all confidence and vision, drowning in business ideas but lacking the capital or financial structure to execute any of them. Patricia saw potential. Not just in his projects, but in partnership. In building something together. She believed in the mathematics of collaboration, in the compound interest of shared dreams. Over the next 3 years, she did more than believe. She executed. Patricia provided $180,000 from her family inheritance as seed capital for Anderson Property Ventures. She spent weekends creating financial models while Daniel networked at cocktail parties. She used her professional connections, relationships she'd cultivated over years, to secure their first 3 major clients. She restructured his chaotic bookkeeping system into something that could actually attract serious investors. When APV's revenue hit $3.2 million in year 4, Daniel celebrated by proposing. Patricia celebrated by quietly turning down a vice president position in New York that would have required his relocation. The marriage, she told herself, was an investment too. She'd learned in finance that long-term gains require patience. Sometimes sacrifice. You plant seeds in soil that takes years to bear fruit. What she didn't learn, what her professors at Howard never taught her in all those courses on portfolio management and risk assessment, was how to recognize when you're not building an asset, but funding your own erasure. How to spot the moment when partnership becomes exploitation. When collaboration becomes theft. By year 7, Daniel had stopped asking her opinion in board meetings. By year 10, he introduced her at events as my wife, rather than my co-founder. By year 12, APV had grown to $8.7 million in annual revenue, and Patricia's name appeared nowhere in the company materials except in the fine print of incorporation documents nobody ever read. She'd built an empire. Then she'd been written out of its history. The tragedy wasn't that it happened. The tragedy was how long it took her to notice. Hannah Brooks joined Anderson Property Ventures on a Tuesday in March, exactly 18 months before the divorce hearing. Daniel introduced her as a strategic business development associate, someone with connections to high-net-worth clients who would help them break into new markets. Patricia noticed 3 things immediately. First, Hannah's resume listed a marketing degree from a mediocre state school and 2 years at a failed startup. Hardly senior-level credentials. Second, Daniel had hired her without consulting Patricia, despite Patricia being listed as co-founder and CFO on all corporate documents. Third, Hannah's starting salary of $95,000 was oddly specific, exactly $3,000 more than the national average for her role, as if someone had researched how to make the compensation seem legitimate. Their first interaction happened in the APV conference room during a quarterly review. Hannah arrived 20 minutes late wearing a designer dress that cost more than her bi-weekly paycheck. She didn't apologize. Instead, she smiled at Daniel and said, "Sorry, traffic was absolutely third world today," then glanced at Patricia as if expecting agreement. Patricia kept her face neutral, but she felt the microaggression land like a paper cut, small, sharp, designed to sting without leaving visible evidence. Over the following weeks, Hannah's comments multiplied like interest on a predatory loan. "Patricia, I love how you're so articulate. Daniel said you went to a really good school. It's so impressive how you've made it this far in finance. That field can be so exclusionary. Daniel and I were discussing the Rothschild account. You probably wouldn't be familiar with that family's investment history." Each comment arrived wrapped in a smile, delivered in a tone that could be defended as complimentary. But Patricia had worked in corporate America long enough to recognize the pattern. Positioning her as an outsider in rooms she'd built. Questioning her qualifications for achievements she'd earned. Treating her expertise as surprising rather than expected. The racial subtext was never explicit enough to report to HR. It didn't have to be. Hannah was fluent in the language of professional racism, the kind that doesn't use slurs but makes you constantly defend your right to exist in spaces you created. And Daniel? Daniel laughed at Hannah's jokes. Agreed with her observations. Stopped asking Patricia's opinion in meetings when Hannah was present. Patricia watched her husband's body language shift around this woman. The way he leaned toward Hannah during presentations. The working dinners that appeared on his calendar with increasing frequency. The inside jokes they shared that Patricia wasn't meant to understand. She told herself she was being paranoid. Marriage required trust, and suspicion was corrosive. But her training in financial analysis had taught her something crucial: pay attention to patterns, not explanations. And the pattern she was seeing looked exactly like embezzlement, only what was being stolen wasn't just money. It was her place in her own life. The 5-year anniversary gala for Anderson Property Ventures took place at the Sinclair Hotel, a venue Patricia had personally selected because APV had managed its commercial refinancing. She'd negotiated the discount. Designed the invitation. Created the financial presentation showcasing their growth trajectory, from Daniel's initial chaos to $8.7 million in annual revenue. She wore an emerald dress she'd spent too much money on, hoping to feel like a founder at her own company's celebration. Instead, she spent the evening feeling like hired help at someone else's party. Daniel's speech began predictably enough. He thanked investors, employees, market conditions. Then his tone shifted to something more intimate. But I want to especially acknowledge someone who's been instrumental in getting us to this moment. Patricia straightened in her chair, preparing to be recognized. Hannah Brooks joined our team 18 months ago, Daniel continued, and honestly, she's transformed how we approach client relations. She's brought sophistication and strategic thinking that's opened doors we didn't even know existed. The applause felt like static in Patricia's ears. She watched Hannah stand, press her hand to her chest in performative humility, mouth thank you to Daniel like they were the only two people in the room. Hannah understands what it takes to succeed in this industry, Daniel said. She's relentless, brilliant, and frankly, indispensable. I don't think APV would be where it is today without her vision. Patricia's hands gripped her napkin under the table. 18 months. Hannah had been there 18 months. Patricia had been there from before there was a there, when APV was just Daniel's untested ideas and her family's money. But the humiliation wasn't finished. As the speech concluded, Daniel added one more line. And of course, I want to thank my wife Patricia for her support from the home front. Behind every successful man, right? The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. That was almost worse. It was casual, comfortable, the kind of laughter that accepts a narrative without questioning it. Patricia had been rewritten from architect to accessory. From CFO to supportive wife. From the woman who built the foundation to someone who stood behind the man who took credit for her blueprints. She excused herself to the bathroom and stared at her reflection in the Sinclair's ornate mirrors, the same mirrors she'd seen when she toured the property for the refinancing deal that saved the hotel from foreclosure. She'd been powerful then. Respected. Seen. When had she become invisible? More importantly, when had she allowed it? Patricia returned to the gala with her professional smile intact. She congratulated Hannah with grace. Kissed Daniel's cheek when the photographer approached. But something fundamental had shifted. The woman who'd spent 14 years accommodating, adjusting, shrinking to fit her husband's expanding ego had reached a breaking point. She didn't know yet what she would do about it. But she knew, with the certainty of a financial analyst reviewing fraudulent books, that the numbers didn't add up. And when the numbers don't add up, someone's stealing. The discovery happened on an ordinary Thursday. Patricia was reviewing their joint account statements, a monthly ritual she'd maintained despite Daniel's increasing dismissiveness of her obsessive bookkeeping. At 11:47 p.m., drinking cold coffee in their home office while Daniel slept upstairs, she found it. Transaction 3847, HB. Wire transfer $340,000 to HB Consulting Solutions. Authorization Daniel Anderson. Date March 15. Memo: Strategic Business Consulting Services. Patricia's pulse didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. Years of corporate finance work had trained her to remain analytical when discovering discrepancies. She opened a new browser tab and searched HB Consulting Solutions. The company had been registered 4 months earlier in Delaware, a state known for privacy-friendly business incorporation laws. The registered agent was a generic legal service. The business address was a UPS store in suburban Maryland. No website. No social media presence. No client testimonials or case studies. HB. Hannah Brooks. Patricia cross-referenced the transaction date with Daniel's calendar. March 15 was 3 days after he and Hannah returned from a business development trip to Miami. A trip Patricia hadn't been invited to despite being CFO. A trip that had somehow required 5 days for what Daniel described as basic client meetings. She pulled up their mortgage account. Their home, the 4-bedroom colonial in Silver Spring that Patricia had purchased with her inheritance before the marriage, had been refinanced 6 weeks earlier. The new loan was $280,000 higher than their previous balance. Daniel's signature appeared on all documents. Patricia's signature had been forged, a decent facsimile, but she could see the differences in the letter formation. She opened their investment accounts. Their retirement portfolio had been partially liquidated 3 months ago. $125,000 transferred to a personal account in Daniel's name only, an account Patricia hadn't known existed. She pulled property records. The commercial building that APV had purchased 2 years ago, the one Patricia had structured the financing for, had been refinanced with Daniel listed as sole owner. Her name had been removed from the deed through a quitclaim filing she'd never signed. Piece by piece, Patricia reconstructed what had been happening while she'd been busy being the supportive wife. Daniel had been systematically extracting her from their shared financial life. Shell companies. Forged signatures. Transferred assets. Hannah positioned as a legitimate business expense to justify moving hundreds of thousands of dollars out of Patricia's reach. This wasn't just an affair. It was financial fraud. Identity theft. A calculated plan to leave Patricia with nothing while Daniel and Hannah walked away with everything she'd built. Patricia sat in the blue light of her computer screen until sunrise. She didn't cry. She didn't confront Daniel when he came downstairs whistling. She made him coffee. Kissed his cheek. Asked about his day. Because Patricia Brown Anderson hadn't spent 14 years in corporate finance without learning the most important rule of dealing with fraud. Don't let the perpetrator know you've discovered them. Not until you've documented everything. Not until you've built an airtight case. Not until you're ready to destroy them. Marcus Chen's office occupied the entire 23rd floor of a downtown building with views of the Potomac River. His paralegal had warned Patricia on the phone that his initial consultation fee was $850 per hour. Patricia had responded, "I'll take 3 hours." Marcus was 56, impeccably dressed, and known in legal circles as the guillotine, not because he was cruel, but because his divorces were clean, final, and beheaded opposing counsel's arguments with surgical precision. He'd represented CEOs, politicians, and at least one foreign diplomat in matrimonial cases that made headlines for their brutality. Patricia arrived with a leather portfolio containing printed bank statements, property records, corporate filings, wire transfer receipts, and a detailed timeline she'd created using project management software. She didn't cry. She didn't explain her feelings. She presented the evidence the way she'd present a financial audit to a corporate board. Marcus listened without interrupting for 47 minutes. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Anderson, do you know what I'm looking at?" "Marital fraud," Patricia said. "Asset concealment. Potential wire fraud. Forgery." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But more than that. Criminal exposure. Your husband hasn't just violated family law, he's potentially violated federal banking regulations." If we play this correctly, Daniel Anderson doesn't just lose the divorce. He loses everything. Patricia met his eyes. That's what I'm here for. Marcus smiled, not warmly, but with professional appreciation for a client who understood strategy. Then here's what we're going to do. You're going to continue being the perfect wife. Act devastated but resigned about the affair if he mentions it. Seem passive, defeated, maybe even a little afraid. Why? Patricia asked, though she already suspected the answer. Because arrogant men who think they're winning make mistakes, Marcus said. They get sloppy. Document things they shouldn't. Say things on tape they can't take back. Right now, your husband thinks you're an obstacle to remove. Let him keep thinking that. Let him underestimate you. Meanwhile, we're going to build a case so comprehensive that by the time we walk into that courtroom, he won't just lose, he'll be legally eviscerated. Over the next 4 months, Patricia became a double agent in her own life. She installed audio recording devices in their home office, legal in their jurisdiction as long as one party consents. She documented every conversation where Daniel discussed business with Hannah. Screen-captured text messages before Daniel could delete them. She discovered Daniel had opened a credit card in her name and run up $68,000 in charges, jewelry for Hannah, hotels for their trips, even a car lease Patricia hadn't known existed. She documented everything. Marcus taught her to be strategic. If he asks you to sign something, don't refuse. Sign it, photograph it, send it to me. We'll document his pattern of coercion. If Hannah makes racist comments, don't react. Record them. If he talks about divorce, act like you'll accept whatever he offers. Men like Daniel enjoy watching people surrender. It was, Patricia realized, a masterclass in weaponized underestimation. Every time Daniel explained something to her she already understood, she nodded as if learning. Every time Hannah made a comment about Patricia being out of her depth, Patricia agreed sweetly. Every time Daniel suggested Patricia should just accept this is over, Patricia teared up and asked him to be fair. And all the while, she was documenting. Recording. Building. Creating a case file that read like a prosecution brief. For months after hiring Marcus, Patricia had everything they needed. We're ready, Marcus told her during their final pre-hearing meeting. When we walk into that courtroom, we're not just dissolving a marriage. We're detonating his entire life. Patricia thought about the woman she'd been at the anniversary gala, invisible, erased, applauded only as support staff in the company she'd founded. Then she thought about the woman she'd become over these 4 months. Strategic. Precise. Dangerous. Then let's begin, she said. Daniel asked Patricia for a divorce on a Saturday morning in October. He did it over breakfast, while Patricia was reading the newspaper and drinking tea. His tone was casual, as if he were asking her to pass the butter. I think we both know this hasn't been working for a while, he said. I've drafted some preliminary settlement terms. Very fair. You keep your personal accounts, I keep the business and properties. Clean break. Patricia looked up from her newspaper with what she hoped was appropriate sadness. I guess I knew this was coming. Daniel looked relieved. Pleased, even. You'll be fine, Pat. You're resilient. And honestly, this is better for both of us. Can I ask? Patricia let her voice break slightly. Is it Hannah? Daniel had the decency to hesitate for half a second. That's not relevant to the divorce settlement. Of course, Patricia said softly. I just want to understand. Over the following weeks, Daniel became positively magnanimous in his confidence. He explained the settlement terms to Patricia like she was a child learning math. The business would remain entirely his, after all, he built it. The house would be sold and profits split 60-40 in his favor since his income had paid most of the mortgage. Patricia's retirement accounts would remain hers, but the joint investments would be divided based on contribution, which Daniel had calculated heavily in his favor. Patricia asked questions that made her sound confused and overwhelmed. What about the money I put in at the beginning? The money from my family? That was a long time ago, Daniel said dismissively. The business has grown well beyond that initial investment. I've multiplied your family's money many times over. You should be grateful. I am, Patricia lied. You're right. Hannah became bolder too. She started appearing at the house, to help Daniel with paperwork, though Patricia suspected the real reason was to mark territory. She'd sit in Patricia's living room, in Patricia's chairs, drinking from Patricia's coffee mugs, offering Patricia advice about moving forward. You know, Patricia, Daniel told me you were really smart back in the day, Hannah said one afternoon while Patricia served them both coffee like a hostess at her own execution. It's too bad you stopped working. Women need to stay relevant, you know. The world moves on. Patricia smiled and said nothing. The audio recorder in her pocket captured every word. Marcus was delighted with the escalating arrogance. They're not even hiding it anymore, he said during one of their covert meetings at his office. Daniel's documented his intent to defraud you in his own settlement proposal. Hannah's establishing herself as a co-conspirator. They're building our case for us. How much more do you need? Patricia asked. Just a little more rope, Marcus said. Let them hang themselves completely. The final piece fell into place 3 weeks before the court date. Daniel, feeling expansive in his impending freedom, took Hannah on a vacation to Turks and Caicos. He posted photos on social media, Hannah in a bikini, both of them on a yacht, captions about new beginnings and finally free. The vacation was charged to a company credit card. APV's company credit card. Which meant Daniel had documented using corporate funds for personal expenses with his mistress. Patricia sent the screenshots to Marcus with a simple message. Is this enough rope? Marcus responded. It's a noose. The hearing began at 9:30 a.m. in Judge Morrison's courtroom. Courtroom 4C was smaller than Patricia expected, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag that drooped slightly in one corner. It smelled like old paper and broken promises. Daniel arrived with his attorney, Gerald Fisher, a mid-tier divorce lawyer known for handling uncomplicated cases efficiently. Daniel wore his best suit and his confidence like cologne, overpowering and obvious. Hannah sat in the gallery directly behind him, her red dress a flag of victory planted in enemy territory. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Chen. She wore the white-collared shirt from the opening scene, professional, composed, unreadable. She'd chosen white deliberately. The color of surrender, of peace, of someone who'd accepted defeat. Judge Evelyn Morrison entered at 9:33. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely and reading glasses that made her look like someone who suffered neither fools nor fraud lightly. She'd been on the bench for 19 years and had a reputation for despising financial manipulation in divorce cases. This is Anderson versus Anderson, Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair. Petition for divorce filed by Mr. Daniel Anderson. Mrs. Patricia Anderson responding. We're here for settlement conference and approval of terms. Mr. Fisher, I understand your client has proposed a settlement. Gerald Fisher stood, utterly unprepared for what was about to happen. Yes, Your Honor. Both parties have reviewed and agreed to terms. We have signed documents ready for the court's approval. This should be straightforward. Straightforward, Judge Morrison repeated, glancing at Marcus Chen with what might have been amusement. Mr. Chen, does your client agree this is straightforward? Marcus stood slowly, like a man who enjoyed the theater of the courtroom. Your Honor, my client has indeed signed documents. However, I believe the court will find this case significantly less straightforward than Mr. Fisher anticipates. Daniel leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. Fisher looked confused. Behind them, Hannah shifted in her seat, her smile faltering slightly. Proceed, Mr. Chen, Judge Morrison said. Marcus walked to the bench and handed the judge a leather binder 3 inches thick. Your Honor, what we have before the court is not simply a divorce. It's a case involving marital fraud, asset concealment, forgery, and misappropriation of joint property. We have documentation of systematic financial abuse spanning 18 months. Daniel's face went pale. Gerald Fisher looked like he'd been ambushed, which, Patricia reflected, he had been. Your Honor, Fisher said, standing quickly. This is the first I'm hearing of these allegations. If Mrs. Anderson had concerns, they should have been raised during negotiation. They're being raised now, Marcus interrupted smoothly. Because the negotiation itself was fraudulent. Mr. Anderson presented settlement terms based on deliberately falsified financial disclosures. He concealed assets, forged documents, and transferred marital property without Mrs. Anderson's knowledge or consent. Judge Morrison opened the binder. Her expression didn't change, but Patricia saw her eyes narrow as she scanned the first page. Mr. Fisher, the judge said quietly. I suggest you and your client review Mr. Chen's evidence very carefully before we continue. Patricia watched Daniel's confidence crack like ice over warming water. He grabbed the documents Marcus had provided to Fisher and began reading. She saw the exact moment he realized what had happened. His face went from pale to gray. His hands started to shake. Behind him, Hannah leaned forward and hissed, "What's wrong?" Daniel couldn't answer. Because he was staring at printed bank statements showing the $340,000 wire transfer to HB Consulting Solutions. At property records showing the forged quitclaim deed. At credit card statements for the card he'd opened in Patricia's name. At photographs of text messages where he and Hannah explicitly discussed hiding assets. Patricia sat perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched the man who tried to erase her realize he'd been erasing himself all along. The settlement agreement Mr. Anderson signed this morning contains several addendums, Marcus began, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess player announcing checkmate. Page 43, Section 7b, includes an acknowledgement that he received $340,000 in marital funds transferred to an entity he created without Mrs. Anderson's knowledge. Page 51 includes his consent to forensic accounting of all business accounts for Anderson Property Ventures. Page 68 includes his agreement to return all marital property transferred without proper spousal consent. Daniel lunged for the documents, flipping pages frantically. Patricia watched her soon-to-be ex-husband realize he'd signed a confession disguised as a settlement. Your Honor, Fisher said desperately. My client clearly didn't understand. Your client, Judge Morrison interrupted, signed a legal document without reading it. That's not grounds for dismissal, Mr. Fisher. That's negligence. But Your Honor. I'm not finished. Judge Morrison's voice could have cut steel. Mr. Chen, you mentioned audio recordings. Marcus pulled out a tablet. Yes, Your Honor. Recorded legally in Mrs. Anderson's own home, where she had full right to record. I have 17 hours of relevant material, but I'll play just 3 examples. The first recording was Daniel talking to Hannah in the home office. Patricia won't know what hit her. By the time she realizes what I've done with the properties, she'll have no legal standing. Her name isn't on anything that matters anymore. The second was Hannah's voice. She's not smart enough to fight this. She'll just cry and accept whatever you give her. Women like her always do. The third was Daniel again. The business was always mine. I just let her think she was important to keep her from complaining. Now I don't need to pretend anymore. The courtroom was silent except for the recorded voices of 2 people who'd underestimated the woman sitting quietly in the white shirt. Judge Morrison closed the tablet. Mr. Anderson, you understand these recordings are admissible? Daniel couldn't speak. I'll take that as a yes. The judge turned to Gerald Fisher. Mr. Fisher, does your client have anything to say before I make my ruling? Fisher looked at Daniel, who looked at Hannah, who had gone absolutely white. Your Honor, Fisher said weakly. We'd like to request a continuance to review. Denied, Judge Morrison said. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of marital fraud, asset concealment, and financial abuse. The settlement agreement Mr. Anderson signed this morning is hereby entered into the court record exactly as written, with all addendums and acknowledgments included. Daniel found his voice. Your Honor, I didn't know what I was signing. That's the second time you've made that argument, the judge said coldly. It doesn't improve with repetition. You signed a legal document. You're bound by its terms. But I'll lose everything. You should have considered that before you attempted to defraud your wife. Judge Morrison looked down at the documents. The court awards Mrs. Anderson full restoration of all assets transferred without her consent. Anderson Property Ventures will undergo immediate forensic accounting, and Mrs. Anderson's original capital contribution will be returned with interest calculated at the business's rate of return over 14 years. Patricia did the math in her head. Her initial $180,000, compounded at APV's growth rate, was now worth approximately $890,000. Additionally, the judge continued, Mr. Anderson is ordered to pay Mrs. Anderson's legal fees in full. I'm also referring this case to the state attorney's office for investigation of possible wire fraud and identity theft charges. Daniel's knees buckled. He grabbed the table for support. As for you, Ms. Brooks, Judge Morrison said, turning her attention to Hannah, who looked like she wished she could sink through the floor. While you're not a party to this divorce, your financial involvement with Mr. Anderson is documented extensively in this evidence. Mrs. Anderson is entitled to pursue civil claims against you for your role in the fraudulent transfer of marital assets. I suggest you retain counsel. Hannah stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. I didn't know, he told me it was all legitimate. Perhaps you should have verified that before accepting $340,000 in transfers, Marcus said mildly. Mrs. Anderson, Judge Morrison said, and Patricia stood. This court apologizes for the ordeal you've endured. No one should have to fight this hard to protect what's rightfully theirs. I hope this ruling provides some measure of justice. Thank you, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. Judge Morrison struck her gavel once. This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Anderson's assets are frozen pending full accounting. As the judge left the bench, Patricia gathered her papers with steady hands. Marcus leaned close and whispered, How do you feel? Patricia thought about the question. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt like someone who'd been lost and had finally found her way back to herself. Free, she said. I feel free. 6 months after Judge Morrison's gavel fell, Patricia Brown Anderson stood in front of the Sinclair Hotel ballroom, the same venue where Daniel had erased her at the APV anniversary party. But this time, the event was hers. The sign at the entrance read Grand Opening Patricia Brown Foundation for Economic Justice. The nonprofit Patricia had launched focused on financial literacy for women leaving abusive relationships, teaching them how to recognize asset concealment, document fraud, and protect themselves legally. She'd partnered with law firms offering pro bono services, created a network of financial advisors willing to consult at reduced rates, and established an emergency fund for women who needed immediate help. The foundation's seed capital came from Patricia's settlement. $890,000 for her original investment. $280,000 in returned home equity. $125,000 from recovered retirement funds. $465,000 in legal fees and damages. Total $1.76 million. She'd used it to build something that would help other women avoid what she'd endured. The ballroom was filled with lawyers, financial advisors, domestic violence advocates, and survivors who'd already been helped by the foundation. Patricia wore emerald green, the same color as the dress she'd worn when Daniel erased her. But tonight, she wasn't invisible. When my husband tried to divorce me, Patricia told the audience, he expected me to disappear quietly. He expected me to accept whatever he offered and be grateful for the scraps. He forgot something important. I built the table he was trying to sweep me from. The audience applauded. Patricia saw Marcus Chen in the front row, smiling with professional pride. Financial abuse is often invisible, Patricia continued. It happens in marriages, in businesses, in families. Someone slowly removes your access to resources, controls your information, makes you doubt your own expertise. And when you finally realize what's happening, you're supposed to be too afraid or too broke or too exhausted to fight back. She paused, thinking of the woman she'd been in the courtroom, white shirt, folded hands, perfect composure hiding absolute determination. But here's what abusers forget. Documentation is power. Knowledge is power. And refusing to stay invisible is the most powerful thing you can do. After the speech, Patricia mingled with guests. A young woman approached her, maybe 25, nervous, holding a folder. Mrs. Anderson. I'm Sarah Chen. My husband is doing what yours did. Hiding money. Creating accounts I don't know about. I didn't know what to do until I saw an article about your case. Patricia took the folder gently. Have you documented everything? I printed bank statements. Took photos of documents. I was scared he'd find out. You did exactly right, Patricia said. Come to the foundation office next week. We'll help you build your case. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't afford a lawyer like Mr. Chen. You don't need to, Patricia said. That's why we're here. As the evening wound down, Patricia's phone buzzed with a news alert. She almost ignored it, but the headline caught her eye. Former real estate developer Daniel Anderson faces wire fraud charges, business partner named as co-defendant. Patricia clicked the article. Daniel had been indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud related to the shell companies he'd created. Hannah Brooks had been charged as an accessory for her role in receiving and concealing transferred funds. Anderson Property Ventures had declared bankruptcy after forensic accounting revealed years of misreported income and fraudulent expense claims. Daniel was working as a commercial sales associate at a real estate firm in suburban Virginia, making $52,000 a year. Hannah had moved back to her parents' house in Pennsylvania after the legal fees consumed her savings. Patricia closed the article. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, not even relief. They'd made choices. They were living with consequences. That was justice, not revenge. The difference, she'd learned, was important. Ready to go? Marcus asked, appearing at her elbow. Almost, Patricia said. She took one last look around the ballroom, at the foundation banner, at the people who'd come to support her work, at the evidence that you could be erased and still write yourself back into existence. She thought about the woman who'd sat in that courtroom 6 months ago, letting Daniel underestimate her while she built the case that would destroy him. She thought about the years she'd spent being invisible so her husband could feel important. And she thought about the woman she'd become. Visible, powerful, and finally, authentically herself. Now I'm ready, Patricia said. They walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the ghosts of erasure behind. Patricia had learned something that no business school had ever taught her. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. It's taking everything someone tried to steal from you and building something so magnificent, so undeniable, that your existence becomes impossible to ignore. It's refusing to be erased. And it's teaching other women to do the same.